Mark Shapiro spoke to the media the other day, and he had a lot of interesting things to say about the offseason plan that the Blue Jays are going to roll with this year. He elaborated on the payroll, on what to expect with the upcoming core, and maybe a potential rebuild down the line. So I'll break that down and much more in this episode of Jays Digest. What's up, Jays fans? I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. Hoping you're all enjoying the daily content, the twice daily content that we've been putting out, as well as the live streams. Those have been a lot of fun, so be on the lookout for those. But Nick, we got some more Mark Shapiro quotes that came out after the press conference the other day. And he had some interesting things to say about the payroll going forward, about what to expect with the current core of players. And I think he pretty much gave away a timeline that we'll elaborate upon as this video goes. But if the Blue Jays don't get something done within the next couple of years, they're going to have a lot of key players hit free agency. They're going to have a lot of money coming off the books and a lot of prospects that are seemingly ready to graduate to the big leagues. So in my estimation, I mean, that all spells out a rebuild. Now, it's not set in stone. It depends what happens in the next couple of years for the Toronto Blue Jays. But it was very interesting that Mark Shapiro didn't exactly shoot down the notion of having a total rebuild over the next 5 or 6 years here.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And like we said in yesterday's video, the reporters did not hold back. They asked about a direct rebuild. They asked tons of questions. Before we get into all that juicy stuff, quick reminder, about 73% of you guys aren't subscribed. We're pretty close to 10,000, which would be amazing. So thank you guys for the support. And let's get into it now. So this was one of the quotes, and this was about the direct rebuild. Mark Shapiro asked about whether the Blue Jays will need a rebuild at any point in the short term. He paused and said, the situation will dictate that. I know we're not going into a rebuild next year. So we both watched the press conference, the presser live, and the question was pretty clear. Do you think the Blue Jays will be going into a rebuild? Mark Shapiro essentially said, he basically said it like this: not next year, is essentially what he said, and he can't guarantee anything beyond that, which means, whether that's a full rebuild 3 years down the line once Vladdy and Bo's contracts are up and they only are able to extend one or maybe none of them, or whether that's a retool of the core, who knows? But he did not shoot down a potential rebuild in a couple years. Obviously next year, and assuming the year after, they're going to stay, with the current core and current team. That being said, I think the team's going to stay competitive. I don't expect, hopefully at least, a crazy rebuild depending on what happens over the next couple years, but Mark Shapiro did not shoot it down.
No, he didn't shoot it down, and nor should he. I mean, this team, they have a timeline, and if they can't get something done within the next 2 years, Vladdy's going to be a free agent, Bo is going to be a free agent. That's assuming that they don't get an extension done, and I don't think they will. I mean, honestly, I think they're just waiting it out with this current group of players. But if you're not going into a rebuild starting next season, then you got to go all in. You got to push all your chips into the middle of the table and add whatever you can to make this core a winning one. I mean, Vladdy and Bo can't do it by themselves. They've proven that year in, year out now. They're not the guys that are going to be top 5 players come playoff time. I think it's safe to say that. It's not an over-exaggeration to say that they're not top 10 players in the game. I mean, we're being critical, but it is what it is. I mean, they're not those guys, and they've proven it. So if you don't have one of those guys, and we look at all the other teams that are left in the playoffs right now, Houston, they have Yordan Alvarez, probably a top 3 hitter in the game right now. Bryce Harper on the Phillies, and they're getting contributions from everyone else. But Bryce Harper is a legit superstar and someone that other teams got a game plan for. You look at the Arizona Diamondbacks, Corbin Carroll, I think he's going to be an MVP candidate for a long time. Jays don't have a guy like that. And you look at the other team that's left. They're eluding me right now. Why is that?
I don't know, but keep going.
The Texas Rangers.
There we go.
Marcus Semien and Corey Seager. There you go. Those are 2 top dogs that they have on their team right there. I look at the Blue Jays roster. They don't have a guy like that. Can they still win with Vladdy and Bo being their best players? I think so.
I agree.
But the rest of the team isn't good enough. And that's why they have to add as many pieces as they can to make this core as balanced as possible. Maybe Vladdy and Bo aren't going to be top 10 players, but they need other guys around them that are maybe top 30, top 50 players. And that's not easy to find. So it's going to be an offseason of a lot of questions. It's going to be an offseason of a lot of hard decisions for Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins and company. But they're going to have to make those decisions. And if they can't get anything done in the next 2 years, then that's when you start walking the line, heading towards a rebuild. That's when you start thinking about, okay, maybe we got to call up some young guys. Maybe we got to turn this team over to the next generation and things of that nature. So it's going to be interesting. But yeah, I mean, these next 2 years are going to be critical for the years that follow after for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I think Vladdy has proven to be able to, do it in the regular season once, whether that's an outlier or unsure. Like these guys are both young. The issue is young at this point. They haven't really proved, they haven't proved anything, especially in the playoffs, and their contracts expiring. So they only have 2 more years to do it. We've seen flashes of it. Is it possible that they become top 10 players? Bo's closer than Vladdy, at least right now, especially because of, his improvement in defense and stuff. But I don't know. They have 2 years to prove it, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Jays extend Bo Bichette, whether it's this offseason or next season, and then they wait on Vladdy to the very end, because I think with Bo, at least if you extend him, you're guaranteed a bit more production, whereas Vladdy, if he's not hitting well at all, he is basically a zero at first base, especially the way he's been playing the past couple of years. But it's interesting to see, and we can continue talking about that, but let's also touch on some of the other things he said regarding the team and the potential payroll for this offseason. He said a lot of time and energy has been spent reflecting, talking, considering, but where I end up and what I keep thinking about is how we let down the fans. The bitterness is palpable for me. So he kind of just, I guess didn't call out the fans. The opposite of called out. He kind of discussed the fans and understanding our pain. Our pain was pretty rough this season. I'm sure he's obviously feeling similar pain to what we are, but we had to endure every single painful minute of this team, and this is the big one here. The Blue Jays don't expect a dramatically different payroll setup for 2024, suggesting the Jays can spend somewhat freely as winter opportunities emerge. Now, I know a lot of you guys out there, when you see they don't expect a dramatically different payroll setup for 2024, they might think, oh, they're not going to spend, they're going to keep the same payroll. Let's make it clear that last offseason, they did spend a lot of money. They did go over the luxury tax. So, I mean, Shohei Ohtani might not be the most available option for the Blue Jays, but they're willing to spend. We've seen them. They're going to spend over the tax. And the question is then, who do they spend it on? And I mean, Cody Bellinger's a guy that keeps coming to mind, especially if they're willing to go over the tax, which it will take for, Cody Bellinger and then Jorge Soler. But I don't know. It's a good sign, at least, that they're continuing their spending trend upwards. And they have no choice with this core right now.
Yeah, well, we know around $60 million are going to come off the books as well, which is something that'll help alleviate some pressure when it comes to payroll with the Blue Jays. Maybe not Ohtani. I think we're getting carried away with that. I don't think it's going to happen. Sorry to burst your bubble, Jays fans, but Bellinger is a realistic option, as is Jorge Soler, and those are two big-time upgrades that you're going to have in your lineup. If you get guys like that, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Those are top 50 to top 40-ish players that'll help. That'll really help take some pressure off your top dogs, which are Vladdy and Bo and George Springer to a certain extent. So if you can add guys like that, then you're really putting yourself in a much better position. You're making yourself a more all-around ball club, because the pitching is good. The defense is good. That has been proven this year. I mean, your pitching and defense was playoff ready, and your hitting was still lagging behind in spring training. And that was the big problem with this group. So if they can add two impact bats, then I truly believe that they can be in the upper echelon of teams and not have to break it up once it's all said and done. But this is a pressure-packed moment now for the Blue Jays. These next 2 years, if they can't get anything done, then it's definitely time for a rebuild. And the one thing I will give Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins credit for is that their ability to retool the Blue Jays and bring them back to relevancy was great. I mean, the rebuild wasn't very long. It only took about 5 years before the Blue Jays became relevant again. And that was great. That was great to see. I mean, obviously Alex Anthopoulos signed Vladdy, but then they made all the subsequent moves. They tore down the 2016 group that started to get old, that started to age, and then they turned it over to the new guys. And then once you got to 2020, they were a legit ball club again. So I think their ability to retool a team is very underrated, even though they've been getting a lot of flack in the last couple of days here. But I don't want that to be the case for the Blue Jays. I want them to hold on to what they have right now and just keep adding to it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they've done a decent job, like transaction wise. We'll have another video later discussing some of them. But if you look at it from broad perspective, yes, they've made mistakes, but in general, Ross Atkins is a fairly decent transactional, GM, even though I know a lot of people are probably going to give me hate for that. But if you go back and look at every single move, you can find bad ones like any general manager, but there's a lot of good ones there as well, especially even in free agency. But Quick thing, Jorge Soler and Cody Bellinger, Peter. I would love, at this point, you got me convinced. Let's just go ahead and grab both of them and just screw the payroll and just go
Yeah.
way into the luxury tax. Bellinger's amazing. He had two down years before this year. You might be thinking it's a fluke, but let's remember this guy was a an MVP type player for a while there, and he found it back. And then not Kevin Kiermaier, but Cody Bellinger. So overall, very very solid. Couple groups of guys. Jorge Soler is the other guy, of course, but I mean. The issue is, Peter, it's only kind of those two. The other ones out there in the free agency market, you have Teoscar Hernandez, who we might consider a little bit, Lourdes, who's not going to be re-signing with the Jays, so there's not many players available. So if you're the Jays, swing for the fences, even though you're going to be competing with everyone else. But any quick thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, if you do strike out on the free agent market, you got to be aggressive on the trade market, and that is something that Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro have done pretty frequently in the off seasons that they've spent as in the Blue Jays front office. Maybe not at the trade deadline; they weren't as aggressive as we would have liked, but was the piece out there to really help this team and complete this team? I'm not necessarily convinced. So yeah, Teoscar Hernandez is another option. I think that's unlikely because Ross and Mark really have an ego to them, and I don't think they would bring back Teoscar Hernandez. It would make them look kind of stupid, and they don't like doing that. So, yeah, I think they're going to be aggressive on the trade market. They got to be aggressive on the free agent market as well, and try to get everybody. Try to get as much ammunition as you can if you're the Toronto Blue Jays, and that should be the end all be all goal this offseason. I mean, don't hold back. You got to spend what you got to spend. Go over the luxury tax if you have to. It's easier said than done because it's not our money, Nick, but they've shown the willingness to go ahead and do that in the past. And now's no different. If you're committing to not rebuilding next year, if you want to be competitive, if you want to keep this championship window open, I put it in quotations because they haven't won a playoff game in 7 years. But if you want to keep the window open, you got to add. You can't just be complacent and run it back with the same group of guys, same group of coaches, and same group of front office because it just won't work. It's like running into a brick wall and expecting a different result. And we know how that ends with the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah, and hopefully they're able to do that. But that'll wrap up the video. If you want to see our video from yesterday, make sure to click the video on your screen now. And we'll see you guys later today for another video.